Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. This story is potentially one of the scariest encounters I had as a child, and I've never seen a more appropriate place to tell it, LOL. It happened 8 years ago, and was, again, very scary at the time, so please bear with me on the details. I was somewhere between 11 and 12, and still had a few more years before I would reach the legal working age in my country of residence, Canada. I was at IKEA with my dad, shopping for a new bed after my sister, she's 2 years older than me, had decided she wanted her very own room, and the two twin beds my dad had nailed on top of each other and called a bunk bed were no longer necessary. I was dutifully fooling around in the store, AK, are the world's greatest play place, in case you never went to IKEA as a kid. While I waited for my dad to go find something incredibly boring, he just remembered he needed to get for his office, like a bookshelf or taxes, when a strange woman interrupted me. "Excuse me," she said, sounding like she actually didn't care at all whether she was excused. "Do you know where the rugs are?" "Oh, no, I'm sorry," I said, because I was a child who could barely remember the last time I'd been to IKEA and certainly had not been paying attention to where the rugs were back then. "Maybe you can ask someone else?" "No," she insisted. "You work here, so you have to know where everything is. That's your job." She was very much in my space at this point, pointing and yelling, and I was torn between being very, very afraid of her and very, very confused. I was fairly sure that it was obvious I wasn't an adult because I was 11 and had not yet gone through puberty. I've never been particularly tall, maybe on the shorter side of average at best. And while I've always been a bit chubbier than my peers, I hardly thought that made me look like anything approaching an employed adult. Foolishly, I thought if I could just correct her, she would leave me alone. "But I don't work here," I told her, trying very hard not to cry. "Yes, you do," she said. "I saw you. To this day, I can only assume that something about my playing made her think that I was working. It's the only thing I can think of. I was playing around with a printer or something that I think might have actually been for employees, but still. I wasn't even wearing a blue shirt. There's no excuse," she told me. All the while I had been thinking that I had a very good one indeed. You have to know where everything is. So just tell me where they are. I was out of options. Thankfully, or so I thought, I remembered that IKEA has a linear layout. I looked it up and apparently there are shortcuts, but all I knew as a kid was that I go in one way and out the other, and I would get to see everything on the way. Since there were only 2 doors in the room, and I hadn't seen any rugs on my journey there, I just pointed to the one I was pretty sure I hadn't come in. I've never been great with directions. Maybe they're over that way. At the very least, she would go off looking and I wouldn't have to deal with her anymore. Or so I thought. No, to my dismay, she was still there and still very, very angry. I was just down there and I didn't see them, so they aren't there. "Tell me where they are." I couldn't even suggest she go in the other direction, because she then started swearing at me in a combination of French and English, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. I think she called me incompetent or something, and even though I wasn't the best student in my French classes, I did recognize some words that I knew I should be very, very offended by. Mostly, I was just scared of her. It was the first time I'd ever had any kind of experience like this, and I had no idea what to say to get her to leave me alone. The store was pretty empty. I didn't know exactly where my dad went. I couldn't see any real employees who would be able to help me, and any other customers in the room just didn't seem to notice. Her yelling wasn't like loud, it was just scary because of her tone and her refusal to leave me alone, and if they did, they didn't care. Thankfully, my dad came back just a couple of moments later. I wish I could write up a transcript of his heroic rescue, but I actually hardly remember it at all. They argued for a bit. My dad shouted something about her leaving me alone and me being a child, and eventually she left in a giant huff without so much as an apology. I didn't care. I was just glad she was gone, and there's no way any half-hearted apology about how she thought I was an employee, which would have made it perfectly fine for her to treat me the way she did, would have meant anything. We didn't split up again for the rest of the shopping trip. Man, okay, story done. Sorry this was such a bummer. I hope it was entertaining, at least. When I remember it, I'm usually caught up in the inherent absurdity of someone thinking tiny baby me was an employed adult, but in the moment, it was just genuinely terrifying. A few years ago, I was working for a local health department, and part of my duties included the weekly monitoring of water quality, at public beaches for E. coli levels. It was a straightforward process. I'd visit the lakes, collect multiple samples in 100 ml bottles, and then take the samples to a nearby lab that the county had a contract with for analysis. Well, it would have been straightforward if it wasn't for Chumley. He earned the nickname because of his striking resemblance to the character from the Tennessee Tuxedo cartoons, although I guess a comparison to the Pawn Star version wouldn't be entirely inaccurate. Chumley was the lab tech who took delivery of the samples and then ran the tests. Simply put, the guy was a jerk. He was doing entry-level lab work, but had the demeanor of someone who was deciding where to put the Nobel Prize for chemistry that was inevitably coming his way. He also viewed all incoming clients as interruptions, and looked at us as if we should bow with gratitude that he would take time away from his vital work to deign to speak with such lowly peons. The first half of that summer, other staff had been monitoring the lakes, and it wasn't until the beginning of July that there was a shuffling of duties and I took over. Soon after I began getting the test results, I got the feeling that something wasn't right. The test reported the amount of E. coli present as a given number of colony-forming units on CFUs. Anything over 300 CFUs and we would issue an advisory? On a good week, the typical range for these lakes was something along the lines of 30, 100 CFUs. But the numbers I was seeing now were in the low teens or even single digits. Given the number of geese, and by extension geese droppings, that I routinely saw, those numbers were just a little bit too good to be true. Adding to my suspicion was the dramatic change in test results the previous summer when the contract for testing passed from one lab to the one that Chumley worked at. In the years prior to the switch, there would be about 40-50 individual samples that came back as high for the summer. The year that the switch occurred, then were dropped to 5. The year that I took over, up to that point, 0. So now I'm more than a little suspicious. The next time I dropped off samples, I asked Chumley if there might be a problem with the test, as those numbers just didn't seem plausible. Keep in mind, I didn't accuse him personally of incompetence, as I acknowledged that it very well could have been a problem with the test itself. The response I got was the jerk love child of indignation and condescension. Apparently, the problem was that I didn't understand the real science behind what he was doing, and I should just leave things to the professional. Okay, up to this point, I was just trying to get to the bottom of the suspicious results. The results that may have been telling little kids it was safe to go swimming in disgusting pools. Now I was genuinely mad. So I went to my boss with my concerns and suggested a simple test. The next time I collected samples, I would collect one extra. I would intentionally spike this sample with some of the readily available goose dropping. While I wouldn't be able to determine just how much E. coli I was adding, if the testing was accurate, the spike sample should at least be significantly higher than the others taken from the same location. My boss agreed, and I collected my samples. The results that came back on my special sample, 0. Not none detected, but 0. Anyone who has done any quantitative work would know that is a huge no. Now I might not be as scientifically savvy as Chumley, but I'm pretty sure that this was evidence that something was wrong. I gave the results, along with the photos I took of the process, to my boss, who promptly had a meeting with the owner of the lab. Shortly after that, the lab lost the contract for all the work that was being done for the county, although it was called a non-renewal. While we are not talking about a loss of revenue significant enough to drive them into bankruptcy, it certainly made a sizable dent in the bottom line. What was the final fate of Chumley? I can't think that an employee who blatantly disregarded valid concerns and cost his company thousands of dollars would have a bright future. Screw you, Chumley. All you had to do was not be a jerk. So check this out. I'm chilling at my buddy Mike's place, right? Mike's this vet, fought in Afghanistan, got the scars to prove it. Super cool dude. Anyways, he's got this legit army flag hanging in his front yard. Not just any flag, man. It's a piece of his history, So, last weekend we're grilling burgers, having a couple of cold ones just soaking in the sun. Everything's cool until this Karen-looking lady, all uppity and entitled, strolls by with her little rat-sized dog on a leash. Now, this lady, let's call her Lady Mess Entitlement, gives us the stink eye like we just slapped her grandma, and said, "What the hell is this?" Now, Karen is a real piece of work. Remember that time she crashed a wedding party at the neighbor's house? A lovely Arab immigrant family? Oh yeah, she demanded they shut down the music because, apparently, Arabic songs are un-American and annoying. Yeah, Karen's got a knack for harassing anyone who doesn't fit into her narrow-minded view of the world. I'm thinking, okay, maybe she doesn't like the smell of barbecue or something, but oh no, it gets way crazier. She spots Mike's army flag, the one that screams, "Hey, I fought for this country," and goes, "You can't have that flag here. It's racist or something. Take it down." Now let me rewind a bit and tell you why that flag means so damn much to Mike. See, he didn't just pick it up at some store. No, that flag was passed down to him by his best army buddy, Jake, who sadly didn't make it back from combat. Jake and Mike were inseparable, had each other's backs through thick and thin. So when Jake fell in the line of duty, that flag became Mike's way of honoring his friend's memory and carrying on their shared legacy. I nearly choke on my burger. I'm like, "Lady, do you even know what you're talking about? That flag represents my dude's service, not some political statement." But she's not having it. She goes off on this rant about how it's un-American to have any flag except the stars and stripes on American soil. Mike, being the chill guy he is, tries to explain, "Look, lady, I bled for this country. This flag means something to me. But does she care? Nope." She whips out a lighter from God knows where and starts threatening to burn the damn thing. I'm not having it, man. I snatch that lighter from her hand like she's trying to set fire to a library. She goes ballistic, screaming about her rights or whatever. Mike's trying to keep his cool, but you can see the storm brewing in his eyes. Karen, or Lady Misentitlement, whatever you want to call her, doesn't back down. She's on a mission to turn that flag into ashes. Next thing I know, she snatches the flag from its pole and tries to make a run for it. I'm like, oh hell no. I chase after her, and it turns into this ridiculous scene of me trying to wrestle the flag back while she's screeching like a banshee. Finally, I manage to grab the thing, and here's where it gets good. She starts yelling that I assaulted her or some crap. Like, "Lady, you're the one trying to commit arson on a vet's flag, and I'm the bad guy." Nah, not today. I tripped her and landed on top of her and took Mike's flag. Mike's on the phone with the cops at this point, and they roll up just as this nutjob is threatening to sue me for damages or whatever. Long story short, the cops show up, Karen gets slapped with a vandalism charge, and justice prevails. But here's the kicker. Even as she's being hauled away, Karen's still arguing with the cops, telling them they're un-American for defending a racist flag. I'm standing there, flag in hand, thinking what the actual hell just happened. Meanwhile, Mike and I stand there, flag in hand, knowing that we've upheld something far greater than Karen's petty prejudices. That flag, weathered but unburned, stands as a testament to friendship, sacrifice, and the unwavering spirit of those who serve. And as for Karen, well, let's just say she learned a lesson that day. But something tells me it won't be the last time she crosses paths with karma. Life's funny like that, isn't it? Full of unexpected twists and turns. But one thing's for sure, as long as we've got each other's backs, we can weather any storm that comes our way. And hey, we've got one hell of a story to tell at our next backyard barbecue. Cheers to that. So this happened to me a few years ago, and I just wanted to share it here. And it is a long one. Senior year of high school, I was taking a plane to visit my grandma. The flight went from Baltimore to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh to Vegas, then Vegas to Boise. The flight from Baltimore was almost empty, and I was southwest, so I could choose my own seat, and I was on the same plane until Vegas. I selected the last row of the plane by the window, put my earbuds in, and took a nap till Pittsburgh. When the plane landed, I went to the bathroom while people were getting onto the plane. To save my spot, I left my backpack in my seat and put my jacket on the seat and left. When I got back, I noticed that this pregnant lady sitting in my seat and her husband sitting in the aisle seat with my jacket thrown on the ground in the aisle with my backpack underneath with a laptop in it. I got really annoyed. I pointed out that I was previously sitting in the window seat, and I wanted to know if I could have my seat back. "Can't you see that I am pregnant and need this seat?" she said aggressively. I then looked at the husband and asked if he could please scoot over and sit next to his wife. This guy looked me in the eyes and said, "Sorry, but we were allowed to choose our own seats, and I chose the aisle seat." Being a high school senior, I wasn't that big of a guy, but I was still not happy to be sitting in the center seat. Realizing that this was a losing argument, and I wasn't going to get any leverage over this lady, I decided to grit my teeth and bear it, collect my stuff, and move into the middle seat. The second I sat down, the lady said, "You can't have your backpack in your seat. You're going to have to find a place to put it." "I'm just going to put it under my seat." "Where am I going to put my feet then?" "I don't know. Not under my seat," I said sarcastically. Suddenly, I felt someone grab my collar. The husband pulled me inches from his face and said, "Don't talk to my wife or the baby like that. You will say you're sorry." I was shocked. Not only was this guy grabbing me in public, but at the time I was only 17 and still considered a minor. But not wanting to make a deal out of this, I gave the most insincere "I'm sorry" to the woman and put my earbuds in as the flight was getting ready to take off. While taxiing, the lady kept trying to get my attention by yelling in my ear and snapping her fingers inches in front of my face before she finally pulled my earbuds out. "You need to turn your electronics off during takeoff," she said. Now, my dad was a pilot for 30 years, and he confirmed that electronics don't interfere with communications. It is mostly a formality so that people pay attention to the emergency instructions. So I ignore her, since we are literally less than a minute from taking off. In rage, she spams the flight attendant button so that one comes. We also had to hold takeoff until this issue was solved. The flight attendant runs over and asks what is wrong, expecting an emergency. He won't turn off his electronics before flight. "He is trying to kill us," she exclaimed. Realizing everyone is staring at us when the flight attendant asked me to turn it off, I oblige. After I turn it off, she starts to lecture me about how she was right and I was wrong, rubbing how the flight attendant proved her right. So the flight is in the air, and when the intercom tells me we can use electronics, I put my earbuds in and crank it. About 5 minutes into the flight, I feel aggravated tapping on my shoulder. I turn and look at the woman. "You need to turn that down. It is bad for the baby." While I was listening to the music louder than normal, it still wasn't to the point that an unborn baby would be able to hear and be able to understand. Shocked, I responded with no, but the second she reached for the flight attendant button, I said that I would. I did that trick where you turn your volume down 2 times and then up once so that it looks like you turned it down 3 times. "Better?" I asked. More, she responded, so I went down 1 more. And before I could put my earbuds in, she said, "It is proper etiquette to talk to people you're sitting next to." But I just ignored her. I sit back and try and close my eyes, and amazingly this worked. I fall asleep for about an hour. It was a 5-hour flight. When I woke up, this woman had her foot on my backpack with a laptop in it, so I adjust my foot so that it would be uncomfortable for her to continue to keep her feet the way they were. She immediately stood up, and I thought she was going to yell given her ability to overreact. But it turns out she was just getting up to go to the bathroom. She gets past me and her husband when a brilliant idea pops into my head. The second she steps into the bathroom, I get ready to get up and move my stuff over to the window seat, and as I grab my backpack and shift my momentum over, I feel a hand grab me. I did not take into account the husband. "You are not taking my wife's seat," he said. "Sir, I have to warn you that you are grabbing a minor, and if I feel like it at any second, I could cry that you are attacking me," I respond as he lets go, and I move over to the seat I had before. When she gets back, she is furious, demanding that I move seats now to the point that the flight attendant comes over to see what is going on. And this time she sides with me. When she asks her husband to make me move, I look him dead in the eyes and he goes back to reading his book. And she sits in the middle seat, looking very angry. Thankfully, I moved seats because she was up and down in her seat having to go to the bathroom every 15 minutes. And that was pretty much the rest of the flight, except how she intercepted my bag of pretzels when the drink cart came. I responded by closing the shade to the window as we started to land at the Las Vegas airport. Once off the plane, I went to Burger King to get a drink and some food. Then I got to my next gate and found the last seat. I scarfed down my fries and burger, walk across the hall, literally 10 feet from my seat to throw away my garbage. And when I turned to go back to my seat, I see the same lady now sitting in the seat I had my bag in. She had moved it to the floor right in front of her. Then she shot me this big smug grin, thinking she had won. Somewhat defeated by losing 2 seats to this lady, losing sleep and my patience, it was time for action. I walked over to her to gather my things, and as I got to her, I looked her dead in the eyes, raised my right hand out, fingers spread, and hovered it right over her stomach. Looked down at my hand, then back to her eyes. "I just cursed your baby." I say straight-faced, turn around 180, walk across the hall, and sit down on the floor staring at her intensely. Now, I don't believe in curses, nor do I think I have the ability to place a curse, but this lady believed it. Her face was left expressionless, and she just started weeping to herself as I sat and watched. When her husband came over to see what was wrong and she told him, he instantly stormed over to me and knocked the drink out of my hand, grabbed me by the collar and got right in my face. "Listen here, you little jerk. Security guards immediately came, grabbed the man, and detained him. The FAA doesn't mess around with who they hire. One guard asked me why this guy was angry, and I said that his wife had taken my seat, and I made a comment under my breath, and he got upset with me. The officer asked for my name and identification and saw that I was a minor. He asked if I wanted to press charges, and I told him yes, but that I also didn't want to miss my flight. He understood and let me go, then informed the Southwest airline gate attendant to please keep track of me in case we needed more information. This meant that I got to get on early, and I chose the first seat I could, aisle seat, to see if this lady would get on the plane. Since she was sitting in the same gate as my flight, she never got on the plane, and it takes off. Halfway through the flight attendant asked me if I put a curse on the baby, and I responded with, "I don't know magic." 20 minutes later, the flight attendant told me that unfortunately I would not be able to press charges on them due to being a minor, but that they missed their flight and they would have to buy a new ticket to their final destination with another airline. With 5 words, I cost this horrible woman and her abusive husband around $500. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. My friend Belle is now retired, but for many years she was an Army officer. Her husband, Adam, was a civilian police officer. Given the nature of their jobs, at least until Adam was forced to retire due to an injury he sustained in the line of duty, they were both very busy, especially early in their careers. So the times they had days off together were a special event. It was rough sometimes, but they made it work, and to this day, they're still 2 crazy teenagers in love. There's an important thing to note about Adam. He was raised to be respectful and courteous to women, chivalry you might call it. It's one of their rare days off together, and they decide to run some errands and get dinner together. A new store in town opened the week before, and they decided to check it out. They get there, and Adam is, as always, being the perfect gentleman. He's holding the door open for Belle, pushing the cart, helping shorter people reach items on the top shelf, that sort of thing. This gets noticed by others. Women playfully tease their husbands with, "Why don't you do that for me, honey?" And this encourages the men to start playing the chivalry game. Meanwhile, Belle is loving the attention and showing mild pide, gentle pecks, smoothing out his collar, grinning at him, etc. According to her, it's like falling in love with him all over again. They check out, and there's a sign at the register saying that there's a military discount. Adam gets Belle's wallet out of her purse. It was resting in the cart's child seat, and shows her military ID so they can get the discount. Once they leave, Adam tells Belle he'll load the trunk and put the cart back and to just relax in the passenger seat. While he's loading the trunk, an older gentleman comes up, dressed nicely. Adam notices, stops what he's doing, and asks, "Can I help you, sir?" He asks politely. "My wife and I have noticed your behavior to your wife in the store, and I wanted to commend you." "It's nice to see such attention and care of a lady." "Thank you," Adam said. "She's my classy lady, so I treat her as such." "As you should." "What's your name and rank, soldier?" Adam suddenly realized what was going on. "Oh, my wife is the officer. I'm just the dependent." The gentleman blushed. "I'm sorry. I heard you say that you had a military ID to present at the checkout." It's at this point Belle, having been alerted by the conversation, steps out. She recognizes the gentleman. "You're the new colonel, right?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," the man said. "I understand you're an officer as well." Belle introduced everyone. The good colonel then said to Belle, "You've trained your husband well. It's nice to see a dependent who doesn't wear their spouse's rank." Adam smiled and joked she told me she'd use me for target practice and bury me in an unmarked grave on base if I ever thought of pulling a stunt like that. And yes, she's a better shot than I am. The colonel laughed and they talked for a couple of minutes before parting ways. Belle still teases Adam about it, saying, "Are you sure you're not an officer?" This is a story that happened a very long time ago when I was around 19 years old. But I still haven't gotten over what a strange experience it was. My grandfather died when I was just a baby. When I was older, my Nana married a new man, a widower, who I called Grandpa Walt. He was the only maternal grandfather I knew, so I considered him my family. I didn't know this during the decade I knew him, but his kids from his previous marriage did not feel the same about my Nana. They did not believe in remarriage and considered her the most evil person in history for tempting their father from his vows to their deceased mother. They refused to see him in the home that my Nana owned, so when he got older and had difficulty leaving the house on his own, they mostly just stopped seeing him for years. He had never mentioned his kids, so I knew nothing about them. Eventually, he started getting bad enough that prolonged hospital stays were getting more frequent, and he needed to be in and out of full-time care. Whenever he was in the hospital, she would visit him until he could return home. They had been snowbirds, spending winters in Florida and summers in Michigan, but because of his health, they had not been able to go to their Florida home in many years. They decided that she would go down for a week or two to make sure the home was okay, and start the process of selling it before its value dropped from lack of maintenance while he was safely in full-time care with staff they had known and trusted for years. Then they could use the money from the sale for his care. I went to visit him the day after he left to make sure he was doing okay. His son and daughter were there. It was the first time I had ever seen them. I had barely even been aware of their existence, but I figured out who they were from context. I said hello and tried to introduce myself. They pretended as though I was invisible, and they hadn't heard anything. Like a child would do when during a game when they pretend a sibling is a ghost, I awkwardly sat in a chair. They proceeded to stand there for over an hour, talking right in front of me to Grandpa Walt about how evil my Nana was, that she would abandon him in some dirty hospital. It was actually quite nice, and run off spending all his money partying in Florida like a gold-digging hussy, and how they hoped he would remember that when it came to his will. It should be noted that my Nana, while by no means wealthy, had a lot more money than he did, and all of their property was hers from decades before she ever met him. She was also an elderly woman with a hip replacement who used a walker. You know, the kind with yellow tennis balls on the legs, so she was in no condition to be partying in Miami or whatever they thought she was doing. He never once responded. He just stared straight ahead with glazed eyes. I wasn't sure if he even heard anything. He was not looking very well, but I knew he always had his ups and downs. So I didn't imagine anything was unusual. I was flabbergasted. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up. But I was a teenager in a hospital room full of sick and dying people, and I didn't know how to fight back without causing a huge scene. Eventually, I just took a brief pause in their rant to stand up and tell Grandpa Walt that I had to go, and that we all loved him and his wife would be home soon after she took care of the house issues. The entitled son and daughter spoke to me for the first time, telling me I didn't need to come back because they would be there for him, and I was not his family. I rushed to my parents' house and told them what had happened, and they filled me in on their issues. And it seemed like even if they seemed awful, I knew it wasn't my place to try and keep them from their father. So I stayed away and gave them time to catch up and hoped that when I wasn't there, they could actually catch up and figure out their relationship. A few days later, my Nana got a very strange call from the hospital. A nurse that she knew very well from Grandpa Walt's hospital called her and asked how she was. Nana said fine. The nurse then awkwardly asked, "Do you?" "No," my Nana asked, "No what?" And the woman broke down. Grandpa Walt had been dead for 24 hours. His son and daughter had forbidden the hospital from contacting my Nana and said they would let everyone know about the funeral arrangements. I have no idea what weird loophole caused higher-ups at the hospital to follow along with this, but his nurse sensed something was up and took a risk of calling to make sure my Nana knew. She did not. None of us did. They were attempting to hide his death and hurriedly hold a funeral before any of us found out. The nurse let us know where and when the funeral was taking place. Nana called all of us on the way to the airport to let us know. We started the phone tree for our whole family, and soon after she was back, and we were all on our way to the funeral. The look of rage and disgust we got when we walked into my own grandpa's funeral, that my Nana got for walking into her own husband's funeral, was terrifying. They glared angrily, and you could see that they wanted to scream and throw us out, but decided not to cause a scene. Instead, his daughter walked up and grabbed a fruit basket off the table. She announced that she was putting it in her car, and if any of her guests wanted fruit, they could ask her and she would go to the car to get it, because she didn't want just anyone eating her fruit. The son and daughter gave speeches about how their father was finally in heaven, back with his one true love, their mother, and finally free from those who tried to tear their love apart. The staff of the funeral home eventually clued into the weird dynamic and found a way to put my Nana's car in the front of the procession, but neither of Grandpa Walt's kids were looking just to give her a brief moment of respect. She was pissed, but there was nothing she could do. These people thought their own opinions on the definition of till death do us part entitled them to hide my Nana's husband's death from her, hold their own funeral, and surely they spent days pressuring their father to cut her out of his will. I wish I could have seen their faces when they found out that none of the property they were salivating over was owned by him. It was a terrible, painful day for her to have to fight her way into her own husband's funeral. I was very sad, but I could not help but laugh at the fruit basket thing. It just came out automatically. It was the saddest, most petty, most evilly pathetic power grab I had ever seen. My housemate and I are in our 20s and live in a unit block with a remote-controlled gate and allocated parking spaces. It's pretty common for residents and tradespeople to park in the shared driveway inside or outside the gate for short periods of time, while loading, unloading large items since there's very rarely available street parking nearby and everyone is usually pretty chill about it. My housemate and I are moving and figured a way to get both of our cars into the car park to load with boxes furniture so we don't have to be constantly shuffling cars. Our car spot is the one at the farthest end of the car park, next to the building. My car was parked there, and my housemate was parked behind me, which doesn't block the driveway or any other parking spot, only the one that belongs to me. We've spoken to the owners of the two closest parking spots about it, and they said it's totally fine because we only do it for short periods of time, and anyway, it doesn't block them getting in or out of their spots. This morning, while we were inside getting boxes, our elderly neighbor from 3 spots down took offense to the fact that my housemate's car wasn't in an allocated bay. So he decided to park across 2 other units' parking spaces to block us in. We came outside, finished packing, and tried to get out around his car, but there wasn't enough room, so we found out whose car it was and my housemate went to knock on the door. First, he refused to open his door to speak to her, so my housemate, who is deaf, came to get me because she couldn't hear what he was saying with the door between them, but she could hear that he was yelling and she wasn't comfortable. I went to talk to him and he also yelled at me through the door and wouldn't open it to speak to me until I specifically asked if he could so we could work it out face to face. Then he initially refused to move his car and kept saying he was going to call the police and have us fined despite the fact that he was also parked illegally. I pointed that out and he told me it was different for him because he's an owner. His granddaughter had to come out and convince him to just move his car into his unobstructed car spot so my housemate could leave. He finally came outside and started pointing at the no visitor parking sign. I apologized and told him that we do live there and we are moving out, hence why we needed to have both cars there to pack. He refused to believe me. I have met this man several times and introduced myself by name and unit number, and I say hello every time I see him around, but I guess he didn't remember my face because he was convinced we were guests and demanding to know who we were visiting and how we got through the gate. I said we used our gate remote. He kept talking over me and asking where we'd gotten a gate remote and who had given to us. I said, the real estate because we live here, and asked if he would like to come to our unit and see all the moving boxes inside to prove that we were who we said we were, and he just walked off. He finally got in his car and moved it into his parking spot, and my housemate left in her car, and I waited for him to finish very, very slowly parking so I could apologize again and thank him for working it out. While I was waiting, his granddaughter came outside and apologized to me for his behavior, and I explained why we're parked like that, and she was really nice and understanding. When he finally finished parking, I went up to him, said thank you, and sorry, it won't happen again. He blew straight past me and didn't acknowledge that I was standing there speaking to him at all. It really felt like the way a little kid storms off after losing an argument, and I was pretty shocked to have a fully grown adult behave so rudely when I was being polite and thanking him, even though he was the only problem in the situation. The kicker is, my housemate's car was nowhere near his parking spot and not obstructing anything. It just wasn't in an allocated bay. His car, however, was blocking the driveway, 2 of the neighbor's car parking spots, and at least 4 cars. But since he's an owner and we're just lowly renters, he fully believed we were the ones in the wrong. When I was 18, young and stupid, I met a guy that I married after only 3 months of dating. Let's call him Fred. Fred turned out to be one of the most violent people I had ever met, and I escaped the marriage with the clothes on my back and the air in my lung. Before things fell apart, Fred decided we needed a new car. It was registered in his name, insured in his name, and the loan was in his name. My name did not appear on anything associated with the car's purchase. He handed me the payment book for this car, and I was dumb enough to keep up payments for a car I had no legal right to. We were in the Army at the time. After several months, he had to go to a different station, but there were several months on my assignment until we could be together again. He took the car. I kept up with the payments. When the time for me to change stations arrived, we planned to spend the weekend in a hotel room together. It went badly, ending with him pulling a gun on me. I managed to persuade him to bring me back to the barracks, where I told my roommate what was happening. I gave her his picture and asked her to give it to the guys on guard duty and tell them what happened because he had a gun. Sure enough, he entered the barracks looking for me. The guys on guard duty called the MPs when he made a gesture that exposed the gun. He was led off in handcuffs. On my way home for leave, I stopped by his parents' house to return all of the household goods that were his. This included the payment book for the car. Several days later, I received the payment book in the mail with a note that I should continue payments. I sent it to him with a note to pay for it himself. A few days later, I got the payment book with a more strongly worded note to continue payments. I returned it with a note that I would not pay, and if he sent it back to me again, I would burn it. The fire was lovely. About 2 days after the ashes cooled, I got a call from the bank asking when they would get the next payment. I reminded them that everything about the car was in Fred's name. I planned to divorce him so I would no longer pay for the loan. I told them, oh, by the way, he plans to ship this car to his next station. Would you like his current address? The Grinch would have been proud of my evil grin. The next day, a repo truck rolled up his driveway and towed the car. The story I got is that he ran after it, waiving 3 months of payment in cash. The repo guys kept it moving. Along with losing the car, he also lost a new set of radial tires, a CB setup, and some luggage that was still in the trunk. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences, opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.